Hi, this is Richard. I just wanted to show this project I was working on for the last couple months. Made my own Hnefatafl set. It's sort of like a biking chess set. If you look up through the internet, you'll find several pictures and videos regarding how to play it, and some people have built their own out of pieces of wood or just simple small beads on a small board that you can wrap up into like a pouch, very medieval kind of thing. I decided to make my own. My first experiments included doing like a Viking design figure. See if you can see it from there. I'm not a very good modeler, but then I figured it was kind of too small, so I decided to make the pieces a little bigger on two different designs. Okay, the way I went about making my own pieces, I grabbed these old pieces of plywood. I screwed on one of these. I think this is well, just a plain old wood screw, or you could use a drywall screw, or probably even a nail. More or less at the height, a little lower than the height of the final piece that was intended. And wrap some wire around it. This is so you can slap on some plastiline, clay, modeling clay, onto the piece and give it a certain firmness. Because if you try to do it without I guess you could call it a skeleton, a nail or something to give it support, it'll just bend out of shape all over the place, because plastiline is, the more you handle it, the softer it gets. So it's a big problem. From here, once the model is made, I got some pieces of plastic binding cover, the type you use when doing those comb bindings or wire bindings, and cut it up to strips and made a wall around it, around the model, in such a way that you have maybe like a between 3/8 and 1/4 of an inch, like I'm getting the measurements wrong, about 1/4 of an inch off away from your model. This is to be able to pour a silicone mold. Once the tube or wall is done, mix up the silicone, pour it in, and that will harden depending how the silicone is. There's different brands and different ways to mix it, but once the silicone cures, you'll get a piece of rubber with the shape of the object that you did. Okay, on this picture you can see the molds, the pores of the silicone that were done for the 4 different pieces I wanted to do for my Hnefatafl set. It's basically should be 2 pieces, a foot soldiers and a king. 1 king and all the rest are foot soldiers. I decided to make like 2 different armies, 2 different designs, so I needed a king and a foot soldier for one, and a king and a foot soldier for the other. It doesn't have the outer plastic wall anymore. This is right before demolding. I snapped a picture before I finished demolding the figures. As you can see, the model itself tends to get destroyed, so don't expect to be able to recover your clay model. On this one, you can almost see the one of the figures almost in its entirety. The other pieces, I have to dig out the clay, the plastiline, out of the mold. When demolding, it's a good idea. You'll see this in various casting videos. It's a good idea when doing these kind of molds to do a zigzag cut. This zigzag cut will allow it to snap, well, sort of snap right back into position, so it doesn't shift and cause a crooked model or crooked pour. This one's already been used quite a bit. As you can see, it kind of holds pretty good detail inside. From here, you can use like a rubber band or some kind of tape to just keep it in place. Don't make it too tight. Don't use too tight a rubber band, because it'll squeeze your model. Well, squeeze your mold and cause a deformed casting. So something that is tight enough to hold it in place, but not so tight it'll deform your model, it'll deform your pour. When I was doing my first pours, I used electrical tape. I didn't have any rubber bands handy or anything else, so anything that'll help it to wrap around. In this case, I used plaster for all my pours. As you can see, well, I didn't really use much. These molds don't require that much plaster. I think a 1/4 cup worked for the four molds, including this small spare. This is what came out of my first pour, the very first pour. You can have problems with bubbles, so you have to not make the plaster too liquidy. If it's too liquidy, it causes puddling of water at the top, and it's a little weird. You do it too thick, you get a lot of air trapped. I ended up with quite a few dozen pieces. To my calculation, I need at least 1 king and 24 foot soldiers because of the way you're placed. You're playing either 12 against 24 or variations where you require less pieces. Okay, with the plaster dry, we can then proceed to paint. These are my painted pieces. This was the first one I modeled. This is a sort of like a lizard man coming out of a shell, you know, very reptilian. There's the unpainted, painted. I basically did a dry brush style of painting. This would be the dragon or lizard man king, winged. The way I would work this is give it an overall undercoat. Doesn't need to be black. I use like a black mixed with green and somewhat diluted, so it'll sink into the plaster. Then dry brush a second layer of a dark green without black, so, to cover the most of it. Then another layer with a lighter green, and then white on the just very dry brush for the white highlights. Just sort of like if you were dusting it. That will pick up all the little details and texture, so it looks like it was some kind of worn stone and green. For the skeletons, I did it basically the same, but with browns, yellow ochre, and basically white. There's the unpainted and the painted. I let the black of the base coat permeate all the way into the socket, so you can have pretty good contrast in that sense. And the king, basically that. On occasions, if you see certain kind of cracks or air bubbles in your casting, you can try and make it look like if it was done on purpose, you know, gives a little different character, gives it a little personality. For instance, in this one you can make it look like if it's battle torn. On some other pieces you might have, well, this one doesn't look it. Some pieces that come out a little incomplete, you can probably make it look like if it was battle torn, you know, scars and that kind of thing. What some people have asked me about, how do they do the texture here? One of my tools had like a textured grip, so I just rolled it onto the plastiline clay when I was modeling, and then just gave the last wraparounds with like for instance a little like headband or diadem. For the board, I decided to use this material. It's I wanted to actually get leather, but for this case I decided for ease, because some stores is open, I went like for at an auto parts store, you know, like an AutoZone or the auto section of your local department store. And this is what they call it. I think they call it chamois or chamois or something like that. It says like a well, basically it's a tanned skin. I forget if it's like a goat or something like that. Pretty flexible. and I proceeded to stain it here and there, and I drew up a design for the board. I used acrylic latex paints, the type you use for airbrushing t-shirts. I figure I can try and I don't think I'll try heat pressing. I don't want to burn the material. I could probably leave it like in the car in a hot day, or I'll probably set it up in the clothes dryer. I do have to wash off the graphite. When I set this up, I did some patterns with a pencil, transferred it on with a graphite pencil, and then I painted on with a brush. I handled three different colors. You got your corners for your safe zones, you've got your centers for your defenders, and you've got your browns for your attackers. The designs are patterned in order for, depends on you want to handle yourself, like in a 7x7 board, 9x9, or 11x11. Because of that, I decided to make up also these corner markers. How did I make these? I basically used the same principle for the other pieces. On a board, I use plastiline clay, since it's not something that's going to be all that vertical. Just straight up. Made the piece in plastiline clay, walled it up, and made a mold. In this case, the mold is this one here. This is the mold. You can probably see the design I carved in there. And to give it some rigidity, because it might be too floppy and your piece can twist when it's when your material is curing, whether it's your plastics or if it's your plasters. It could warp, or it could widen out. So I don't have fiberglass, so I use this old plaster. I use plaster with bandages to make it a little bit more sturdy. Once it dries, it's pretty light compared to when it's damp. And I poured it with these sort of like keys to make sure it rests properly into it. So yes, put it in there. I gave it a quick sort of like varnishing. I actually used some PVA glue just to seal it up and make it easier in case some plaster from the pour goes over onto here, so it doesn't stick. I can easily break it off. And basically that gives me these pieces. This was painted the same way. I gave it a dark undercoat, then I gave it a general gray on top, trying to not go too much into the little crevices and carvings, and then a very dry brushed white to catch all the little details. So I can place these in the corners, and I can set up my game. For instance, there we go. I can put, for instance, I want the defender to be skulls or skeletons. I can use my painted markers as a reminder of where the pieces go. Otherwise, I did put a little reminder pattern to know how to set up the pieces in case I want a particular combination or configuration for the setup. So for instance, this one here is a very basic 7x7, so actually this would be something like that for the defenders, and the attackers. This on a 7x7 configuration, 7x7. There we go. So here's the king, and we've got attackers from four sides, and the objective is for the king to get all the way to one of the corners, to the safe zones, if you want to call it that way. There we go. It's not that easy. It's kind of a one-sided game, but I guess that's the objective, to see how good you are at escaping the attack. Let's say this guy goes here. This guy could have, whoops, not there. Well, I don't have much practice. I might never really play it seriously, but it's good to have this as a project, you know. The day I decide, oh, I'm going to play it, I can play it. Well, I hope you liked this little video. Maybe you found it helpful, some ideas. My idea here is that I could build different armies. I could probably make a new set with Amazons, or finish up the Viking side. Or I could make, I don't know, I could make some Aztec warriors. I don't know. It's just an idea, because my original idea was to try and make my own chess set. You know, all the king, queen, rook, knight, pawn, all that. But it's going to take some work, because I'm not very good at modeling pieces. I hope you liked it. I'm going to close off with some of these pictures of the different setups of 7x7, 9x9, 11x11, and how it looks more or less set up. Okay, hope you enjoyed it or found it useful, inspiring, gave you some ideas, and catch you later.